story of the Indian middle class. The Indian middle class is currently around 30% of India's population. It is set to grow to nearly 50% of India's population by the year 2031. And by the year 2047, which will be the 100th year of India's independence, more than 1 billion people in India will be called as middle class. Incredible numbers that are coming out of a report called The Rise of Indian Middle Class. Let's understand what is driving this rise and this kind of phenomenal rise. We've seen it already come quite a long way already, and it's got a long way to go as well. So, where will India's middle class's growth come from? We have Mr. Karan Maharishi, economist, joining us live on the broadcast. To start with, the Karan Maharishi, fascinating numbers, isn't it? More than 700 million people in India will be called middle class by the year 2031 from the current around 400 million, nearly a doubling of Indian middle class in the next 6 years.
First of all, thank you very much for having me. I think it's an inevitability. So if we are forecasting those numbers, then those numbers are based on the fact that Indian economy will be almost $10 trillion economy by that year. So, so the demand is actually driving the equation of aggregate demand here. And if you look at the overall story, then India is a domestic demand-driven economy, and consumption is obviously the primary driver here. And that, in turn, is driving both the saving and investment functions. So I'm not really surprised with these numbers here. And I think India has almost 2 decades more worth of free runway of economic expansion, and India will probably be the second or third largest economy in the next 15 to 16 years.
Right. Karan, the other point that needs to be made, even as you talk about the rise of the Indian middle class, that many might just automatically assume it's the rise of the middle class in the big cities of the country. But the fact of the matter is that, the consumption demand is going to be majorly driven by the rural markets, and the rise in consumption, because of the rise in middle class, the rise in consumption, 55% of it is said to come from rural India.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to look at the bottom of the pyramid story, and that has been written by a lot of economists and policy makers, that the rural part of India's consumption story is alive and kicking, and it cannot be ignored. As we understand, almost 55-60% of Indian population lives in non-urban centers, and because the base is so low in that region, the consumption demand will be growing at a much higher number as compared to the urban numbers.
Right. Karan, I have another point that I want to ask you on. And according to this study, the rise of the middle class, a force to reckon with by People Research on India's consumer economy, or PRICE. That study classifies the average household income for a middle class household at 2021 prices, as in prices as of the year 2021, as
right,
between 5 lakh rupees to 30 lakh rupees, and per capita daily income of between 298 rupees per capita daily income to 1,770 rupees. Let's leave out the second part. That's a little more difficult to understand. Let's talk about the middle class, which means 5 lakh rupees to 30 lakh rupees annual income. Would you think it's a fair classification that somebody who's a household which gets about 6 lakh rupees in a month, it can be classified as middle class at the prices at which things are right now?
So what year is this classification for? If I understand it's the valuation is for 2021 numbers, but what year are we talking about here?
As in, Karan, the point here is that the study which says that by 2031 we will have X amount of middle class, and by the year 2047 we'll have X number of middle class. That study classifies the middle class as income between 5 lakh rupees to 30 lakh rupees, and that is calculated at prices as of the year 2021.
Right. So understood your point here. So I'm actually not sure about the fact that the purchasing power of a household is valued on a year which precedes the actual output. For example, in this case, we're talking about an economy of 2031, and we're talking about a purchasing power of a household based on 2021 numbers. So that's basically adjusting for inflation. But we don't know what the inflation figures will be in 2031. So
No, if I were
so
to ask you,
I
Karan, as of today, if
yeah
a household were to get 6 lakh rupees put together,
yeah
of all income that it gets, can it
right.
be classified as a proper middle class? Because 6 lakh Indian rupees, convert that into dollars, will mean absolutely nothing, as far as global standards are concerned. And even at 6 lakh rupees in India prices as of today, I'm not sure how much you can afford as a bona fide middle class.
So it's almost so if you look at it from the purchasing power parity perspective, and that is what should be done as
Yeah.
far as emerging markets like India are concerned. So you just have to do a 3.5x or 4x. So in dollar terms, that will be so for example, at this point in time, your per capita income is around $2,700. So if I take the number as $3,000 per capita, and I just do a 4x, then that's almost $12,000 of purchasing power. And when you have about say 700 million people in the rural category with that kind of average per capita income, and I think that's humongous as far as consumption goes. So as we understand, this is average number. So you have roughly 50% of households earning higher than $12,000 per capita in purchasing power. So I think this is a huge number as far as economic outcomes are concerned, and I think this is what is driving India into superpower status in the coming years. So I'm pretty optimistic about these numbers, and these numbers are very impressive.
Karan, hi, I have a question for you. So I
Yeah.
think that was what Krishna was also alluding to. The categorization, see, the number of middle class is expected to, increase by 2.5 times in the next 24 years, from 2021
Yeah.
to 2023 to 2047, right? So
Right.
the categorization of, the bracket, the categorization 5 to 30 lakh income, does it stand, or the middle class probably, like considering inflation, that number should also be looked at. Probably they'll earn higher, the categorization of 5 to 30 lakh for middle class.
That's absolutely okay as far as the statistical. I mean, if you have a statistical concern regarding these numbers, I think it's very normal as far as national income accounting is concerned. So that range, even though I think that range is very high, you need to have a lower range. So I think whoever has done the analysis has been playing safe because they have such a large range. So the number can fall anywhere in between. But even if we consider these numbers, as I said, it's pretty impressive as far as economic outcomes are concerned, and the purchasing power of a household is concerned. So we have to also understand here that the purchasing power, it is just not only based on the household itself. It's also based on the purchasing power of the entire economy. So given the fact that if you're talking about 2050 or 2040, then Indian GDP will be over $25 trillion, $25 trillion. And at this point in time, it's only $3.7 trillion. So you just have to understand the kind of consumption power that will be unleashed over the next 20 years. So even though obviously nobody has seen and nobody knows what will happen over the next 20 years, there could be natural calamities, there could be wars, there could be anything. So we don't yet know how things would pan out. But if the current situation prevails, then there's absolutely no stopping the Indian economic juggernaut.
All right.
And the purchasing power, as I was mentioning, will only rise. And we also have to understand here that Indian economy doubles every 6 years.
All right.
So yeah.
Fair enough. Karan, stay with us. We have Dr. S.P. Sharma, Chief Economist, PhD Chamber, now also joining us live on the broadcast. Dr. S.P. Sharma, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us here on Business Plus. So we're discussing the rise of the Indian middle class, and this latest report says that the Indian middle class will grow to over 700 million by the year 2031, where India will be a over $7 trillion economy with the consumption of over $5 trillion, of which 55% will be driven by rural India. Talk to us. What are your thoughts on these numbers?
Yes, numbers are very true, as that is reflected from the growth trajectory of Indian economy, that we are growing in a fastest mode, and we are the fastest moving economy in the top 10 economies, and the projections are that in the next 5 years also we will be the fastest among the leading economies. So that has happened, that our middle class is growing significantly, and with the push of reforms during the last 7-8 years, particularly the ease of doing business and ease of living, are providing a great trajectory of growth to the people. And now the projections are that we will be 5 trillion, 10 trillion, even 20 trillion, $25 trillion economy in the next 25 years. That will happen in the at the time of our 100 years of independence. So India's growth story is becoming more and more lucrative with the more and more push of the reforms by the government. Starting from 2014, as we were at 142 in the ease of doing business. Now we are at 63 according to the World Bank rankings. And the startups and unicorns are making the trajectory of growth very, very prominent and sustainable. That's why India's economy is becoming more and more lucrative. And from the export side also, we are making new highs every year. So India growth story is becoming more and more significant and prominent in the global market arena. And middle class, which is a major consumption class of the Indian economy, is now moving ahead with more and more strength. And projections are that India will be second largest economy by 2047, which will provide a great lucrativeness of
Right.
the Indian economy and attract more and more investments from the global investors.
Right, and by that time, by 2047, more than 1 billion people in India will be classified as middle class that we're talking about. I just wanted to, bring one more important, factor that I want to discuss as well. The percentage of those considered as destitute will fall from the current 14% to about 5% by the year 2031, which means in the next 6 years, we're talking about those below the poverty line as little as 5% of India's population. That's a very important metric as well.
Yes, that is also an important metrics, because middle class is a backbone of the Indian economy, and as we are considered the consumption economy, consumption is our backbone. We are not dependent on the exports, and we can grow with the support of the consumption. Our consumption is at around for 58-59% of our GDP, which is providing a great push of the local demand, and demand is rising like anything, and that is supporting the growth of the economy. Because we faced the coronavirus, and the economy was hit by the coronavirus, and we were 23% down in the first quarter of the 2021. But in the next quarter, we recovered from that slowdown, and we recovered in a positive trajectory with the support of the consumption demand that has happened at that particular time. So consumption is our backbone, and we are going at the rate of consumption trajectory. But with the more and more reforms for the rural development in India, our consumption growth story will become more prominent, and our middle class will become more and more strong and rich in the coming times.
Right. I'm going to take this to Karan as well. Karan, the fact of the matter is that the stronger middle class also is pointed out by the fact that the same report says that they will be driven by trends like premiumization and spending more often. So clearly, the might of the Indian consumer, and if you say that by the year 2031, in a $7 trillion economy, you have consumption alone contributing over $5 trillion. That speaks of the value of spending as well, and not just the numbers.
So, Krishna, you have to look at the Chinese economy as an example here. So, if you have to understand how Indian consumerism would evolve over the next 10 to 15 years, you have to look at what is happening in China. China is today one of the largest consumers of luxury cars or even women FMCG items, even women leather bags, for example. China is the biggest market in the world. It even eclipses the US. Ferrari sells, after the US, they sell the largest number of cars in China. So I think that is, and even though China is not a consumption-driven economy, it doesn't have the kind of consumption-driven economic output as India. It's an export-driven economy. So you have to understand. It's pretty easy to understand here, Krishna, that what would happen to India when Indian households will have that kind of consumption power. So I think it could be even understatement to say that Indian consumption would be around $5 trillion. Could be even higher, given the fact that Indian consumer and the households have the propensity to consume in a much larger magnitude as previously anticipated.
Mr. Sharma, I have a question for you. One of the interesting points that I found in the report was that the growth of high income class among rural households has been greater than urban households, with former growing at about 14.2% and the latter at about 10.6% in the last 5 years. And it also highlighted that the urban poor have become becoming poorer, have become poorer during this period. So how do you read those findings of the report?
Rural rich are increasing at a faster rate as compared with the urban rich class. That is true because the base is low for the rural segment, and at the low base they grow at the faster rate, like the states which
And
are
also, sir,
growing
they
in
don't get taxed. The rural rich don't get taxed, do they?
But income, they are not exempted from the income tax, but the base is low. Like the states, some which are at the developmental stage are growing at a much faster rate as compared with the already developed states. Like the states like Bihar and other states are growing sometimes 10%, 11%, and 12% in the GSDP numbers. That is also happening in the rural story, that the rural rich is growing at a faster rate as compared with the urban rich, because their base is high. That's why they can't grow at 20%, 30% every year, because base becomes high. So the growth becomes slow at a high base. So that's why that difference is happening in the urban and rural rich. But definitely the disparity should be removed, and with more and more developmental activities, so that poor class is downtrodden is also facilitated to move forward and to enter in the middle class in the coming times.
So, as we were talking earlier in the show before you joined us, we were talking about classification of each of these classes. So, in 2047, let's say urban, at currently middle class is defined as those earning between 5 lakh to 30 lakh. Will it be right to categorize them 24 years down the line in the same bracket? Because I mean, a haircut today probably costs around 100 to 300 bucks. 24 years down the line, it could cost us 1,000 bucks. So, categorization. Does it make the report or the findings of the report look more rosy than they actually appear?
No, I don't see such kind of difference, because the middle class will become more and more prominent, and lower middle class will become the upper middle class. And I think the people in the lower middle class will be lesser uh, uh, as compared with the down the line 25 years. Like the number of people in the lower middle class are high now, but in the coming times they will become more and more entering and strong in the upper middle class. So the trajectory of upper middle class will be more strong as compared with now after the 25 years.
Right, Karan, and that's where the fundamental debate is eventually going to lie. What is the middle class? does somebody who's, even according to prices from 24 years, account for even for inflation, and you think of the situation today, 24 years down the line, you're making 6 lakh, 5 lakh rupees a month, and say you have even one child in the household, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to get through month after month.
So, Krishna, my assessment is that as the economy evolves and becomes developed and the efficiencies rise, inflation levels also go down. So if you look at the examples of the West, especially the European Union, US, then you will see the inflation numbers are low. So this happens because the cost of capital declines, efficiencies increase, and therefore inflation numbers are low. So that is also something that is a reality that we have to consider when we look at the Indian economy over the next 20, 25 years. Obviously, inflation numbers won't be 5%, 6%. It would be much lower. And we also have to understand that as the Indian economy grows, per capita incomes will also rise, and these categories will also evolve. So we also have to see here that relative poverty will always remain. There will always be people who will be earning more than the others, and there will always be capital owners, as Thomas Piketty always says, that over the long run, the rate of interest is always higher than the rate of growth. So I think that's a reality. As long as we will have a capitalist system, even though this is bordering economic philosophy, but as long as we have the current system of capitalism, we will always have capital owners. There will always be people wealthier than the others. So relative poverty will always remain, but the overall standard of living will rise significantly for Indians. And I think that is the bigger story that we have to look in this report.
Right, that's the biggest story. Interesting, isn't it, Suyash? Because we can have these conversations back and forth. The fact of the matter is that the story of the Indian middle class remains strong. The hope is that the balance eventually happens. That you have lesser and lesser of the lower middle class struggling to make their ends meet, and more of the upper middle class.
That's what the report is also highlighting, that the number of destitutes are going to come down significantly from 14% to 2%. The aspirers are going to come down from 51% to about 11%. So the overall, the transformation of wealth, the changing income mix, we'll see it across the classes.
Right, fair enough. And that's the fact of the matter is there'll be a transformation of the income mix of those in India, isn't it, Dr. S.P. Sharma? If I were to ask you, you see those pie charts over there, the aspirers, the middle class, the destitutes, that the entire mix of society will be changed in that sense. And when the destitutes are reduced to that number, that percentage of the population, it also points to a time where life is more peaceful, with lesser conflict within society, so to speak.
Yes, definitely society will be more peaceful and happy, and our happiness index will also increase in the coming times as the transformation is happening. And I think the people from the agriculture sector will also shift from agriculture to the manufacturing or the services. More and more workforce will happen in the lucrative sectors like the services sector, and the efficiency of the agriculture sector will also increase, as already we are in the higher growth of the agriculture sector is more than 3% during the last 5-6 years. So the trajectory of reforms and the shift and transformation of the population will happen in the coming times, with more and more positivity and happiness and peaceful life in the coming times, as the economy has started providing the results at the ground level with the reforms, the advent of reforms which started many years back and is now becoming prominent and touching the ground with more and more strength from the growing sectors of the economy.
Right. The other number that I don't think we're focusing on enough is that if the middle class is going to double from 31 to 61%, there is going to be the rich of India who are going to go up by nearly 6 times, from 4% to 25%. That's an incredible number, isn't it, Karan Maharishi, which points to tons of millionaires and billionaires and zillionaires from India in the future.
So, Krishna, even if I do not consider the fact that most Western critics say that 1% of the populations own 90% of capital. So, but even if I go a bit more lenient and say that 10% of Indians own 90% of capital, then that would mean that in 20, I mean, my assessment is that by 2030, 132, India's economy will be almost $10 trillion, a bit higher than what the report is
Yeah,
suggesting.
the report says
So,
$7.1 trillion.
yes. So, but even if I consider the $10 trillion threshold, as I was mentioning, then that would mean that 10% of Indians would be owning almost $9 trillion worth of output. So, so that is tremendous wealth that will be generated in this country over the next 20 years. And when Indian economy will be worth $20 trillion, then you can pretty much assess that almost $18 trillion worth of output will be controlled by 10% of Indians. So with that kind of wealth generated, there will be thousands of billionaires and even trillionaires who would be traveling the world and driving the consumption story in tourism, in luxury items, in stock markets, private equity, venture capital, etc. So India's influence in the financial markets will only rise from here.
India's influence in the financial markets will only rise. I'm going to take a closing comment from Dr. S.P. Sharma as well, and that's a very important point. All of this points to only one thing: India's influence in the global financial trade, India's influence in global financial markets, and India's value in the world as a whole is going to significantly go up and probably go back to the way it was originally before colonization.
Yes, India's participation in the global economy will increase. Now, India is at around 3.7% or 3.3 to 3.4% of the global GDP. But this share has to rise in the coming times as the growth of the economy is faster than all the top 10 leading economies. So the share of Indian economy will increase, and the participation of exports in the global exports will also increase, and our ease of doing business will become more and more prominent, and happiness index will also become lucrative in the coming times, with more and more peace in the minds of the people, with the rising income levels and the rising living standards of the people. So the growth story of Indian economy will remain intact, and this will improve at a significant way in the coming times, and we will be a developed economy by 2047 with the support of the reforms by the government and the efforts of the people, and the lucrativeness of the businesses to attract more and more investment flows from the foreign market. So the story for the Indian economy is looking very promising in the coming times, not only for the years but for the decades, to become a developed economy and a lucrative economy in the global charts, with more and more employment opportunities, and the people relying more on Indian economy in the coming times.
Right, Dr. S.P. Sharma, Chief Economist, PhD Chamber, and Karan Maharishi, Economist, joining us live on this broadcast. Thank you so much, both of you, for helping us understand the story of more than 1 billion Indian middle-class people set to be by the year 2047, which will also be the 100th year of India's independence.